Welcome to The Breakaway with David and Fabian. Today we have a great guest, Nick Tartaglia. Nick is a co-founder of the New Gen Mindset, where he develops theoretical work on behavioral economics, which he then channels into his published books, authoring two so far: The Intelligent Millennial, Time to Optimize Our Collaboration, and Millennial Economics, Structuring Economic Consciousness in Individuals. And he's going to give us a great edification on what is happening within the economy and what would happen if people like, let's say, Kamala Harris got into office. Welcome, Nick. Thank you for being here.
Cheers, guys. Nice to see you.
Thanks for being on the show with us today. And as somebody that understands how the economy goes, I have a just straight up question to you. We've seen Kamala Harris propose a federal ban on price gouging. Yeah. How would that impact average Americans and even, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds? How would that impact them?
So fundamentally, the issue of price gouging is control. Now, what we've learned throughout history, or through any monetary cycle, or through any Roman Empire, or anywhere in human history, you see it over and over again, is price control tends to be the solution that any government or centralized system will use as a byproduct of an inflationary burst that they've created. So then they'll act as if that's somehow the solution to the problem that they've already created. But the issue with price control is you're preventing the marketplace from communicating based on price mechanisms. And the most important thing you want the market to do is communicate to itself. But the moment you intervene yourself in between the communication of prices, you now create these massive problems, such as, well, I no longer want to enter this space. I don't want to produce this anymore. I want to move away from that. You deflate ecosystems and you destroy entire operations and businesses because of the fact that you can't exist within that framework of using price control to somehow create some sort of downward pressure on prices. That doesn't work. It never has. And the only way they can potentially even remotely do that is either by making it illegal to increase prices, which at that point, you're just going to destroy businesses that have their inflationary inputs going up, so they can't increase their prices to offset it. And typically small to medium businesses are the ones that are going to suffer the most, not large companies, because they'll have most of their profit margins. And then the second thing you do, you allow proper supply and demand mechanisms to kick in, so you can never actually truly bring prices down. So the government has to then subsidize and kind of further use deficit and money spending to kind of create the illusion that price control is actually working, but in reality, it's not.
And we see this happening currently in places like Venezuela, where they have these government-sanctioned grocery stores, but you can only go so many times in a week, depending on what your ID number is. I mean, it's just crazy that you can't get food when you need it. And if you do, you have to go to places like the black market. They're calling it black market. It's just a market where people sell groceries. And you have people buying cheap, not eating, holding on to it and selling high. I mean, you're creating a market where people should be eating this food, but instead they're storing it just to make profit because they have something like 1,000% inflation, which is just insane. It's never worked. I actually just found out that Hitler actually introduced price controls, which I actually did not know this. But it's really interesting hearing people from the corporate space coming out and finally saying, hey, this is too much, because it's not just food, it's every commodity, it's every item that we produce, and there goes our profit margin. And then how can we actually make money if we can't charge what we need to?
Correct. And we can't forget, the people that are most impacted by these tactics are always the small and the medium businesses, never the largest, never the big companies, because they always have the government by side with them, subsidizing them, giving them special privileges, giving them ways to gain advantages that the small and medium business don't have. So these things are very short-sighted economic solutions. They're very, very politically driven. It's a feel-good tactic that actually fundamentally solves absolutely nothing. And history is an absolute proof of this, because you can go study monetary history, economics throughout mankind's tale, and you'll always see the same thing. It fails without a doubt, and it always comes with greater consequences down the line. Now, on that subject, quickly, what I would say is, for people that really want to study a little more of the subject, there's two series on YouTube I recommend. One, it's Mike Malone's Hidden Secrets of Money series, where it's a 10-part series where he goes throughout monetary history, and he gives you examples of what happened throughout time and similarities that's happening nowadays. And this was a documentary series made 10 years ago. And another one is by Milton Friedman, Freedom to Choose, another 10-part series on economics. And he goes over all kinds of different subjects, from unions to price control to inflation to all these things. So if you really want to study more of the subjects, I definitely recommend two of those, because they teach you a lot and you can really understand from the historical standpoint and from a monetary standpoint, where this is just pure politics. And the only way these type of solutions thrive is because most people are ignorant of history and ignorant of economics.
I did want to actually ask you a question about this whole monetary theory. So it seems like that the progressives believe that in this new monetary theory that they can just print as much money as they want to for whatever reasons that they believe they need to. And it's fine. It's not going to damage our economy or cause inflation whatsoever because we are the ones that are in control of the dollar. Now, on the opposite side of it, we have, and a lot of Democrats also like this, is fiscal conservatism, right? Not printing more money and just being fiscal conservative with the taxes that we already collect and dispersing them to whatever programs that we believe we need to. What is the dangers behind what progressives believe when it comes down to just spending as much money as they want to and printing as much money as they want to, since we are the ones that are in control of that currency?
So it's funny when we use the justification that because of the fact that the world, so as we know, after this, the world wars, then through the U.S. Providing protection on a global scale, they've kind of inserted the U.S. dollar as this pillar on a global scale for monetary or for trading around the world. So that's kind of given them the leverage to kind of hold that position that no matter what we do, the world will always want our dollars. So they can kind of export their inflation, since the money supply that they keep expanding doesn't necessarily remain within the same ecosystem. So you're not necessarily having the same amount of goods being chased by an ever increasing amount of dollars. Instead, they'll export it to other nations who will then give us actual goods. So for example, in Africa, something they're realizing is, well, we're giving you our gold or silver or commodities, and you're just giving us useless paper money that we actually have no fucking use for with. And here we are realizing, well, shit, you actually want our real currency, our real power, and you're giving us garbage that we realize we can't do anything with it. So it's the position they hold on a global scale that really kind of validates, or at least the illusion that they can forever print money and it'll have never no consequences. But the issue is it's a very fixed framework to have, because the rest of the world clearly understands that that is a power they have, but it's not a power they want them to maintain forever. Hence why you have things like the BRICS development and other nations on the east side of the world developing their own financial systems and own financial mechanisms to transfer or to pay for goods through the yuan, through gold, through silver, through other currencies, and not just the US dollar, because they understand that if the US dollar remains king on a trading scale, on a global scale in terms of trade, well, then forever they can argue this nonsense. So the one thing also they use is the petrodollar. So the petrodollar refers to the fact that most of the world would always exchange oil in dollars, but that's becoming a regressive reality where year by year you're seeing this truth where other countries are starting to pay with the yuan, euros, gold, and other things in their basket, and not necessarily the dollar anymore. So these are things that are detriment to the destruction of the position that the US dollar holds. So this in MMT nonsense where you can just forever go about printing money and it'll have no consequences is just another derivative of which traditionally within the economic system in the West, what we teach is Keynesian economics, where we believe that in order for the economy to sustainably grow, you need perpetual government intervention to stimulate the economy, steer it in the right direction, and you require that negative deficit from government to kind of direct investment in the market, because the market is inefficient, it doesn't understand what it's going to do. So we're stuck in this loop of always using the same tactic, but clearly over 100 years, you're seeing it. And the beautiful thing we have to do is look at this. Look at interest rates, how it's performed over the last 20 years. It keeps going down. And this nudge of trying to raise it is only not really doing anything, because America or the West in general is stuck between a hard place and a rock. We can't raise it too much, even though where we are now is technically what was the norm before COVID. But now we're panicking at these rates because of the fact there's too much debt in the system. So the consequences are building up in the system, and people are just not realizing it, and they're being distorted by these metrics of, look, GDP goes up, look, employment is high. But the thing is, if I spend a shit ton of money and I keep increasing my deficit and printing money that I don't have, well, it's natural that the GDP is going to rise, and it's natural I'm going to create jobs in the short term. But it's not fundamentally solving anything, because you're just creating an inflationary burst and you're distorting the market mechanism. So it's a short-term tactic. It's illusionary, and it doesn't fundamentally solve anything. And again, the only reason why these type of ideas can thrive is because we ignore history and we ignore economic principles.
You know, I'm glad you brought up the Africa story, because I think it's disastrous what's been done, not just by one country, but by the whole world, where exactly like you said, they're taking their gold and they're replacing it with fiat currency. And I just found out a few months ago that France, in order to do business with these countries requires a massive deposit into the Bank of France before they even loan them money. So they're giving them $1 and they say, hey, from that dollar, we need 30% back to even do business with you. I mean, it's just insane what's been happening. One question I did have, I've been thinking about this spiral that we're on as you're talking about, and the government is printing more and more just to pay the debt. We're over $1 trillion in interest every year, probably at 1.5 very soon, just to pay off the debt that we have. In my mind, this means that the entire world, to a certain extent, is essentially getting government welfare checks every single month, because there's no difference between welfare checks and the government having printing money to pay out interest. In my opinion, it's still printing money and giving it to someone for some reason. So if the U.S. is continuing to print money to pay all of these actors all over the globe, a lot of them who we know don't have the same interests as America, where's the tipping point? Where are we going to say we can't keep paying everyone from our pockets, or not even our pockets, just printing money, because it's going to collapse the system? What has to change for it not to implode, I guess, is a better question.
Well, here's the perfect one. So I was referring before to Milton Friedman's series of Freedom to Choose. So in there, one of the things that we talk about was inflation, precisely. And one of the things he says is you have to think of inflation like alcoholism. We can either do one of two things. We can either say, well, we're going to accept the consequences of the withdrawal of being an alcoholic, and we're going to suffer those withdrawal effects, but we're doing it voluntarily and consciously. So we're ready to attack it so we can move past the pain and eventually move on with our life in the right direction. Or we could do what typically alcoholics will do, is they'll solve the solution of their withdrawals with more alcohol, but eventually that'll kill you. So we're in this situation here where we're fighting the problem with the same problem. So we're using more inflationary principles to offset inflationary cycles. So we're like an alcoholic in the West, where we just think debt is somehow the solution. But to me, I think of it kind of, I'm not a religious person, but I think of it kind of like the devil, where we're extending our hand to these cheap, weak solutions to somehow create this offsetted illusion that we're so powerful and great. But in reality, you're just driven by debt. Nothing that was produced as a byproduct, nothing that was really done to improve the standard of living anybody. All you just did was increase the money supply, or protect the wealth of assets, or give money here or doing that. And somehow you're going to then dictate, well, look at that. GDP is strong, employment is strong, we're good to go. You don't have to believe anything else. I always tell people the economy is a byproduct of human activity. If you don't look at how human society is progressing as a collective, are we more collaborative? Are we talking? Are we debating? Are we arguing? Are we depressive? Are we killing each other? Are we fighting each other? Are we suicidal? Do we hate each other? Like all these socioeconomic metrics, those are the real indication of the direction of a society is going. Inflation is merely an illusion to kind of distort the regression in society. But it's like alcoholism. Eventually, it's going to bite you in the ass. You're going to get killed. So for me, honestly, one thing is we really need to kind of focus on making people more aware of economic principles, so people understand the consequences of their solutions. It's easy to say you understand economics, but then you go vote for the person whose solution doesn't actually fundamentally solve anything. So we're stuck in this cycle. History proves this over and over. And this is kind of the fight between the Republicans and the Democrats. This is why I'm a libertarian, because I believe politics itself is a distortion of economics, and you're deviating away from what fundamentally solves people working together. Playing politics to me is like kind of like what animals do. It's one majority versus another herd, or versus, like, you look, oftentimes you'll see monkeys, one herd versus another. Whichever one's bigger wins the other, and they win and they get to dominate the resources and the women and so on. Well, playing politics just seems to be who's the bigger majority, then I get to put whatever I want on you as a byproduct. But we don't solve anything that way. We just need to go back to principles. Let's collaborate. Let's solve fundamental problems. Let's create value, and let's do it on a voluntary basis. And let's just stop fucking everybody over by saying, well, because I want this to be done, I'm gonna delegate the task to the government, who then has to redirect resources to itself, which it does through inflation or taxes, and then it does what it wants. But at the end of the day, all you're doing is creating wider wealth disparity between the lower class, middle class, and the wealthier. And we're just recreating a pyramid structure where you have few at the top, majority at the bottom, whereas typically in a free market, it's more of a diamond structure. Many in the middle, few at the bottom, few at the top, and you get this natural cycle of movement where people move up over time, given enough time, and you get these natural booms and bust cycles within that. We don't have any of that anymore.
That makes a lot of sense, Nick. I have a question to you as a libertarian. I wonder what is your view regarding taxes? So in 2018, we had the Trump taxes implemented, and it's impacted majority of the middle class in a very positive way, right? Individuals have anywhere between $200 to $300 extra a month. People who owns businesses, they received an incredible tax cut in terms of corporate tax relief from 35 to 21%. The individual income tax brackets do expire at the end of 2025. Do you believe that we should extend those? Do you believe that we should keep it somewhere where it is right now in terms of individual income tax? Do you think that we need to increase it?
So my belief is probably going to be a little extreme when it comes to income tax specifically. I believe there should be no income tax because of the fact that
My guy.
it's your money. The way I see it is if I give for, like, I'm Canadian, I'm from Canada. The average Canadian gives away maybe roughly half of their total income through everything they do throughout the year to the government. Basically what that's saying is that I'm 50% a slave of the state. Whereas before people were 100% slaves. I'm only 50% better off than them. I'm not 100% better off. My standard of living in terms of the tools and access to food might be slightly better, but I'm still in a cage where you take half of what I produce and then you say, well, I'm going to give you back money to help you. Well, get out of here. Like, that was my money to begin with. And now you're going to use taking my money, giving it back to me as some sort of God complex or hero complex to solve my problem. I believe there should be no income tax. It's your money. Other mechanisms to collect income or for government is another thing. But my thing should be the pursuit should be trying to lower it as much as possible. I get we're in a position where we have a lot of debt. We have a lot of social liability programs. So you can't necessarily cut it off right off the bat. You need a regressive plan where slowly, bit by bit, you can weed yourself off of these old school principles. I mean, every single collectivist, communist, tyrant, dictator has always collected taxes. And the only reason they can is because they have monopoly on force. If I don't pay you a tax, I have to go to jail or I'm going to get punished. I'm not very free if that's the case. So for me, zero should be the absolute objective. You can't do it in one night. It has to be something you do over time. And the issue is you have so much debt in the system that you can't just cut it off like that. There has to be a way to go about choosing to this efficiently to cut off as many social spending programs we have, whether it's anywhere in the West, and then slowly pay off the debt and weed yourself off of this system where everybody has to pay into the system that nobody truly gets the benefit. But there's two things we have to worry about. Is one is the federal debt growing, and two is the aging population. So the social security pensions kicking in. Those are the two biggest waves of monetary problems coming to the West because we have a massive aging population. So it's not a simple solution, but if we were to cut the government in half, like Malay's doing in Argentina, I'm sure there's a lot of things that we can do because there's a lot of inefficiency in the government.
And I'm glad that Elon Musk has agreed to run the Government Efficiency Commission or whatever the name is, because I mean, to have someone with a fresh set of eyeballs who's not part of the deep state going in there and saying, hey guys, something's really wrong here. I think it's like shining a light on a bunch of rats or cockroaches who start scattering. And that's exactly what they don't want to happen. I did want to ask you a question about tariffs, because tariffs have been something that Donald Trump has said he will do again in his second term. And there seems to be people who don't really understand tariffs who get a negative feedback on it. What's your thoughts about tariffs, and can it help us outgrow the problem of this rising national debt if we're to do something like cut taxes?
So personally, on a macro picture, when it comes to tariffs as a whole, because I'm a libertarian, because I believe in free trade, absolutely. Tariffs are just a way for government to collect on external sources in order to protect local communities for their businesses. So it's to say, well, I want my local enterprises to be able to benefit internally and to incentivize the local communities or the local country to purchase from local industries rather than external industries. So I will place a tariff to increase the cost externally. So you kind of indirectly nudge people to purchase locally or domestically. I obviously don't believe in that, because the way I see it is the people should be buying whatever is best for them and the cheapest as possible. This is how you create deflationary bursts where you allow prices to come down naturally, because you're not trying to use a taxation as a way to kind of direct prices or direct people to buying. People are buying what's good for them because it makes sense. Naturally, the market would adapt. Now, I get why also a lot of them will do it. Like in Canada, for example, they just implemented a 100% tariff on electric EVs out of China and a 25% tariff on aluminum being purchased outside of Canada. Now, Trudeau was in a discussion with a worker who's in that industry, and he's like, yeah, but that doesn't guarantee you're going to protect my jobs. And it's true because now if everything goes up in cost, what you might do naturally is you might destroy the industries internally, because they might say, well, I don't want to produce anymore. I don't want to do this stuff anymore because costs keep going up and I can't necessarily play in the industry. For me, it's a government intervention solution that I know both sides of the parties kind of want it, but I get it. They're trying to find ways to kind of lower taxes on an individual level and try to collect taxes in some other form. I get it. I think the best solution for Trump would be, I'm going to seek a way to cut government by 10% every year that I'm in my office, so that by the end of my term, at least 40% of the government's gone. I think that would be his best solution, because this way, all the revenue still coming in can go towards redirecting the paying the debt, and it doesn't have to naturally use some sort of price manipulation to distort the market and hopefully encourage some more tax revenues. His solution should just be, cut your costs as a government. Don't try to seek more revenue. So as a libertarian, that's kind of my principle. Distorting prices in the market for me is never the solution. No matter who it is, no matter what their intention is, stay out of it. Just focus on reducing government. That'll probably be our best bet.
Yeah, that's actually a great response, and I'm gonna have to go think about that myself, because I think that tariffs is a good solution, but you actually brought up a lot of good points here. I kind of want to have a follow up to what we were discussing earlier. So if we remove individual income in the United States, or individual income taxes in the United States, and we don't have tariffs to replace that, essentially, then how are we going to fund institutions that are perceived to be a necessity of our society, if the federal government doesn't necessarily have any, stream of revenue come into it?
So business tax is another thing. I don't necessarily find that to be a horrible idea, but I believe that it's like in the past, there was a lot more voluntary principles back in the day where people donated a lot of money to the government. And the thing is, our idea of what government does and how they solve problems is too broad nowadays. For me, there's only three fundamental pillars government serve. One is protect my border from foreign threats, allow me to protect my property, so my house. And then the third thing is really provide me a judicial system where I can hold others accountable. Now, that type of lean government doesn't necessarily require nowhere near amount of revenue as it does now. And I'm pretty sure that a marketplace where most people get to keep their money, where government respects their rights by the Constitution and the fact that they're sovereign individuals, and understand the value of what the government serves as a purpose in terms of protecting those rights and providing that fair game environment, I would be more than happy to donate to the government and think of it more of as a charity, where I want to participate in the system and I want to help it. I don't want you to take from me because you think you know best. I want to give you what I can because I know you want to provide as much value as possible. Basically, what I'm saying is work for that and then I'll pay you. Same you would in a marketplace, except the government doesn't create that incentive because they can take by force because they have a monopoly on force. So I believe that there could be some form of business taxes, more charitable donations, where individuals give money to the government, because I believe a lot of people would in this context. And then thirdly, if you reduce government by drastic amount of money, the amount of money they need to collect is not that much. You just have to put it into context. If I'm 50% of the size, do I really need all that money? No.
I'm there with you as far as the getting rid of the income tax. I'm very for that. Correct me if I'm wrong, or if this is even possible, where the government, if they are spending beyond their means, they would have to actually print the money that they needed all at once, so the American public could know, wow, you guys don't understand how to run a balanced budget, so this is how much you're printing. Because I feel like when you have taxes, income tax coming into the government and you're printing, you can convolute it so much that people don't really understand what it is, because you add layers of complexity onto what should be a very simple system.
Printing money, taxes, inflation, these are all mechanisms to redirect wealth to the government, or for the government to permit to do what it wants with the marketplace. Whether you do it directly by taking at source, or I do it indirectly by creating an inflationary burst where money goes, like, think about it, in an inflationary cycle, government makes more money, but nobody ever talks about how government is gouging prices and how government makes more money, but they like to point the finger to businesses and say businesses are making more money, and everybody starts attacking businesses. But look at all inflationary cycles. At the top of those cycles, governments are collecting more money than ever before. Politicians are making more money than ever before, and their salaries are all hedged for inflation. So the more the reality increases in cost, the more money they make. I don't disagree with what you said. It's just a bunch of layers of complexity to confuse people, and people don't understand what's happening. If what's the point of collecting taxes if you could just print your money? There's so many things that are wrong with the system. And this is why I say we should not have a system whereby they can just take money from us at source. Now think about this. If the government was to give you, if you were allowed to keep every dollar you made, and then at the end of the year, you actually had to give a check to the government, I'm pretty sure more people would have a hard time giving away their money. But the issue now is we get taxed at source. So you already get your money taken out of your pocket. So it's not as felt. But if I got to keep everything I produced, and then at the end of the year, the government said, now you owe me 30% of everything you made, everyone with a family would be like, what the fuck are you telling me right now? Are you serious? You probably get much more of a revolt, or more people saying, hell no. But because you take it at source, you kind of you've gone behind the curtain and hidden away from the fact that I'm taking so much money. So all these little cheap tactics. And then the other thing is people believe that the economy is a byproduct of government intervention, or the government permits the economy to thrive. It's such a flawed perception, because the economy exists as a byproduct of nature. The way we move resources, when you eat, when you make friends, when you make family, when you want to produce a home, when you want to cut a tree and take that resource to produce a shelter, that's all economics. You don't need government for that. Government has inserted itself in a society, and people now think that without government, there is no such thing as an economy. So we've kind of deviated from principles, and government has absolutely taken advantage of that ignorance. And this is why we're in these destructive cycles that have happened for thousands of years, because we don't seem to understand that we can do it without it. History proves it. The greatest innovations, the greatest solutions, the greatest of mankind comes from the people. It didn't come from government.
Nick, are you a fan of Ayn Rand?
Yeah.
And her work? Yeah, I could tell, right? Because a lot of what you said are key principles that we see in Atlas Shrugged, right? And it's something that I saw her interview that she did with one of the Wallaces long time ago. And she said it so perfectly that the individual man should be able to decide for himself how much money he's going to give to the government, because then if society is built on the selflessness of the man, then the individual who puts money into the government wants to see great investments in their community that will then help out his immediate community, right? Essentially building a phenomenal society on the selflessness of the man. And it seems like what you were telling me before, not needing individual income, not even being worried about tariffs, essentially, because then if you leave it up to the individual to voluntarily give money to the government, they will to see immediate investments within their community, which will expand the lives of everybody in the community there.
Correct. Absolutely. At the end of the day, we like to say, back to a Ayn Rand reference, they say we need to support the smallest minorities. Who's the smallest minority in the world? It's the individual, the one person. You are one. It's not a group of blacks. It's not a group of Hispanics, not a group of Italians, not a group of Irish, not a group of Asians. It's the individual. No matter what skin, no matter what tone, no matter what background, you as an individual, you're the smallest minority. The system must be developed to reinforce the protection of that individual, no matter where the hell you come from. The system is not designed that way. It's primal. It's a majority versus a minority. It's what animals play. If you look in the animal kingdom, the way herds and animals play each other, you'll see the exact same game with politicians and we play politics. That's not how you solve anything. You need people. Well, at the end of the day, we're social organisms. That's the biggest definition of a human organism, is we are social creatures. By default, we thrive when we work with other humans. We don't thrive when we do our own little thing in the jungle. And no, we thrive working with others. We need a system that reinforces that. Only the free market reinforces our nature, which is free collaboration. And through that, we have produced some of the greatest things on human earth. But we've kind of forgotten those things. So we need to bring those things back.
All right, Nick. So we have, I don't know if you know, since you're up in Canada, but we have an election here coming up here. So we know that Kamala Harris' honeymoon period is over. She's falling in the polls. Trump is surging in the polls, and she's been copying a lot of Trump's policies. I literally, line by line, she's saying the exact same thing. And I don't even know if they care at this point what she says, because we know she has no policy yet, and she's a puppet. So she'll do whatever she needs to do to satisfy the people in power when she gets into office. So she can parrot any line and just not do any of what she says. We've seen politicians do this time and time again. It's kind of their, the way that they do things. So how do you see the election playing out, and where do you think we'll find ourselves after November 5th, or after the new president gets elected, or in office, actually?
So on a global scale, let's take a macro first. I know the East would absolutely love to see Kamala Harris. A winning of Kamala would literally turn America into Canada. You will now become what is a socialist welfareism nation that thinks that taxing and government intervention is the solution to everything. That direction is an absolute path if Kamala wins, without a doubt. And the world will love the enemies of the West will love to see a Kamala, because a weak nation, a weak leader who doesn't understand what she's doing, who can't articulate, who holds no respect on a global scale. That's an absolute course. Now, domestically for the US, I honestly don't think either Trump or Kamala is a solution, because I think USA has become so polarized that no matter who wins, one side is going to be angry at the other side, and it's just going to escalate. I don't think there's going to be a bridging of forces with one or the other. I don't think it's happening anymore. I think USA needs an entirely new leadership that can bring back balance to the ecosystem, because I don't that the left hates Trump so much that they'll vote for anybody as long as it's not Trump. And the right despises the left so much that they'll never in a million years vote for them either. But you're getting to a point now where the right has all the weapons. The left will destroy everything in their path if they have to, like you saw in France, right? So in France, they thought the momentum was going to the right. The left ends up getting a super majority because the left all came together. They win. What does the left do? They still go about destroying their entire city. They just burn things in their path. So the left, if you get Trump, they're just going to go and burn their cities to the ground. So nobody's winning in this. Ideally, for the short term, I think Trump is the better candidate, fundamentally, just because it's like if we talked about inflation, we said we want prices to stop growing as fast. I think Kamala's a really hyperinflationary type of issue, whereas Trump is an inflationary issue. He still has inflationary ideas that are government centralized, but nowhere near to the extreme of Kamala. For example, Trump said that he would support government forcing or mandating insurance companies to pay for IVF. That is a welfareism program. That's a socialist principle. That's socialist policy, because you're benefiting a collective few or a special interest of few and ignoring the rest by taking the resources of everybody. That's a welfare principle. So I still believe there are some sort of socialist policies on the Trump side, because he's going to play the political game to win a voter base. But it's nowhere near as drastic or as scary as Kamala. That, without a doubt, I believe so. And the enemies will thrive far more with Trump, with Kamala. So I think also on a global scale, you'll see more conflict if Trump wins.
And I agree with Nick here, and especially about the whole, why would countries like Russia, Venezuela, Iran, they would love to see Kamala as the president. One, it'll continue to erode the middle class, so we'll have issues here domestically. And when the United States is weak, that means that all of these other countries can actually play the key role that they want to, whether it's to be the world hegemony like China, or it's to destabilize regions like Iran does. Right. So and we saw that, right, Fabian? We saw Putin come out. He kind of giggled about it, but he does want Joe Biden. Her
infectious
in office.
laugh.
He does want Kamala Harris now in office. Right. Exactly. Her infectious laugh. Right. Because with her laugh, apparently she can defeat Russia or China or whatever it is. So quick question for you, Nick. Domestically speaking, do you think that progressive initiatives that Kamala proposes can actually somewhat benefit average Americans, or is it actually going to continue to erode the middle class?
They're cheap tactics that'll be no problem. We're going to lower the costs, but by lowering the cost, all you're going to do is subsidize. In order to do that, they're going to increase the national debt, and that's just going to create more inflationary boom cycle. So it's a distortion of the marketplace where you'll feel like you're doing better off, but then you're going to wonder why prices are still going up. So all they're going to do is just use governments. They're just going to use more taxes or more debt. Well, and let's reality is just say more debt, because the government doesn't actually have any money right now since there's so many trillions of debt. So they're just going to use more debt to intervene, to subsidize the reality of prices, to make it appear like things are cheaper, to play your hero. So you're going to owe me now as a political leader, because you're going to vote for me because I'm making things appear cheaper for you. But then in reality, inflation is going to keep going up, and then while that's happening, you say, well, look at the evil companies. We're going to price gouge. They're price gouging, so we're going to control prices. We're going to punish them. Like it's just one tactic within their basket of typical patterns. Like, this is not something new. This is not something abnormal. It's not like they're getting creative with new ideas. You could literally 2-3 years ago, with most of the macro and libertarian community, we were already talking about, okay, we're having inflation. All the experts saying there's no inflation. Obviously, they're full of shit. Then eventually you're going to get the stagnation where things are going to kind of like flatten out. Then they're going to start they're going to raise interest rates. Things are going to start going sideways. Then eventually they're going to realize, well, we can't raise interest forever because, well, there's too much debt. It's going to implode on the labor market. It's going to destroy a lot of the bad investments in the marketplace. So interest rates are going to start coming back down. That's when you're going to start seeing gold do really well. What's happening now? Gold's doing really freaking well. in that, they're going to start saying, well, look at that. Prices keep going up. They won't be able to control it. So they're going to say companies are evil. That's what they're doing. And then they're going to use the same tactic they've always done throughout history, was price control and subsidizing the market to create the illusion of cheaper prices. And this is exactly where we are now. Like, this is not new. This is not some sort of brilliant idea they have. They're just recycling old ideas that have always failed. They just get the privilege of what we were talking at the beginning of, the fact that the dollar is on a global scale at the center of the global trading system. So you can kind of hide a little bit of the consequences and push it down the line, whereas other nations can't necessarily do that. But eventually, as the BRICS and other nations start pushing the US dollar out and start doing their own thing, well, you're going to start seeing probably the ball rolling at a much quicker pace than it is now.
You've mentioned libertarian a couple of times, so I'm just curious, are you satisfied with the current Libertarian Party's leadership here in the United States? And especially their candidate, Chris Solver?
Yeah, so I know, so no, it's hard to gain because people don't understand where we come from as a political philosophy. Most people are so stuck on the only way to solve problems is politics, and libertarians play horrible games of politics because it's not about promising things. It's about saying we're going to undo things, and people don't want to hear that because then they don't understand how things are going to get solved in that framework. So because there's so much lack of understanding and we're so built culturally around government having to be involved in every solution, that the libertarian philosophy and the libertarian political party gains no momentum because there's no way to understand why that could be a solution. Granted, most of the political leaders are not very strong. They don't have strong characters. They don't have a lot of presence. So maybe they're just not doing a very good job of putting themselves out there and talking to more and more people to be able to escalate themselves to a level where they can hold a debate with Trump or hold a debate with Kamala. And I'm pretty sure that if we could see that between Trump and the Libertarian Party, I'm pretty sure we would find much more middle ground there because of Vivek, who's also has a lot of very political libertarian principles in his mind. I get it. If you don't want the worst enemy to win, you have to kind of partner up with somebody else who can kind of slow the effects down. But no, whether you're looking at Canada or anywhere in the world, libertarians are horrible at politics. So we don't ever gain momentum. It's not the course of action. People have asked me, Nick, why don't you get into politics? Because if I spoke the way I did, nobody would vote for me because I wouldn't be telling you what I'm giving you. I'd be telling you how I'm going to get these fuckers out of the way. You can keep more of your money. But to them, keeping more money they don't understand how that solves problems for them. To them, it's, well, what are you going to do for me? That's not how, at that point, it's like giving your hand out to the devil. You think you're going to benefit because the devil's giving you something, but there's consequences that come with that. Same thing with the government. The moment we ask government to solve our problems and to be our savior, it comes with consequences. Because if we're saying government is needed because human beings are so bad, then why the hell do we keep going back to the government who's made up of human beings? It's like somehow only the government is good and the marketplace is bad, but yet it's all human beings. So we're stuck. So I have no hope politically with the Libertarian Party. And I think it'll always be this duality between the Republicans and the Democrats. You see it in Canada, you see it in the rest of Europe, mostly the West. The rest of the world, it's mostly one dominant political leader. But across the West, you see this duality between the right and the left.
You know, I'd be really interested to see in the next few years how the number of libertarians, registered libertarians, increases or decreases because of something just as simple as having X around, where people can get information at the speed of light without being censored. Obviously, you do have a messaging problem if you're telling people we're going to start taking things away, like breaking down the government, but it's going to be good for you when they've been led to believe that handouts are what what they should expect from governments and who they're going to vote for. But I'd like to thank you for an incredible, insightful conversation, Nick. Nick Tartaglia, the co-founder of New Gen Mindset. Check out his website, newgenmindset.com. And Nick, what are your socials so people can get a hold of you?
So you could also find us on YouTube, where we have our podcast, where we talk to economists, traders, market analysts, entrepreneurs, CEOs, macro analysts. We talk a lot about commodities and the way the world is shaping. So that's on YouTube, New Gen Mindset podcast. You can find us on Instagram. Mine is Nick, NIC Tartaglia as well. And then all our stuff is on YouTube, on our website if you want. So www.newgenmindset.com.